Hi, my name is Ingtie and I'm from E by Afternoon, and today we have Quentin with us. Right now Quentin is living in Geylang and he's actually a practicing architect. Quentin, can you maybe introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Quentin. I'm the founder and principal architect of Studio Limau. Studio Limau is about making buildings, but we deal with more digital stuff. With AI, we look at analytics, and then we also work with automation in design. And I do live in Geylang, and I do have a lot of opinions about urban planning, the design, and also how we can shape it for the better.
So around which part of Geylang do you live in? Like the spicy part, the non-spicy part?
Well, definitely the non-spicy part. That's where most of the residential areas are congregated. But you do see a lot of spillover from across Alternate Road during the weekends.
Like what kind of spillovers? Like so the people will kind of cross.
You do get very strange mix of people. For instance, some nights you get this whole group of very well-dressed teenagers from the international school having dinner after their event in the coffee shop. And then some nights you get a lot of all these foreign workers who like to go to Geylang because there are a lot of cheap stuff and spicy stuff for them, but they spill over to the other side for food and like just to mingle with their friends and drinking and all that things like that.
Any details on like which of these districts that the international school kids and the foreign workers typically hang out in?
Geylang itself, I would say it's kind of split into, if you want to talk really about urban planning scale, it's split into 4 nodes. The first node is where the spicy thing is located. It is the even numbered lorongs from 2 all the way to 20, and it's separated by Alternate Road. And then you have the 24s to all the way to where Paya Lebar is. The northern side is after Geylang Road, bounded by Sims Avenue. So I would say that the lower number lorongs are the ones that are a bit spicy, and also that's where the good food is. And the higher number lorongs are less spicy, but also good food, but I think more calm and a lot of residential areas.
Okay, cool. So for yourself, maybe you can share like what's your connection with Geylang? I know that you stay there now, but did you live there beforehand, or like do you have any particular connection with Geylang before moving over?
I'm always a Eastie since young, so East side, West side, right? Yeah. So like when I was looking for a place to move closer to the city center, there are only a few choices available. And then if you're like a working adult, young adult in the 20s, there's not a lot of places you can afford in terms of rent. So Geylang is one of the obvious choices because it's really close to the city. It's really well connected with 2 MRT lines and almost a direct access to the city center at very discounted rates. So that's where you find a very interesting mix of a lot of young adults versus people who are just looking for a good deal staying there.
Right. So would you say that actually a lot of your neighbors were also people like yourself, local Singaporeans that are like late 20s, just trying to find somewhere that they can, set up?
Yeah, I would say local Singaporeans and a lot of expats who are clueless about Singapore and then sign a lease there because they are unaware. And I think that happens to all of us when we go to Europe, we don't know that like we're staying in the red light district area, right?
Yeah, when I was in Japan, like my mom booked the hotel, right? It was straight up right behind the very interesting street where all the hosts and everything kind of hang out at. So at night when we were walking back, we were like, oh, are we supposed to be here with your mother of all people? Yeah. So I guess that's why you chose to live in Geylang lah, because the rental was a little bit more.
Yeah, it is probably, you can say, if you look at the metrics, it's probably 20% cheaper. If you look at from a property perspective, even Paya Lebar, which is further away from the city center, the prices are 20% more expensive than Geylang, whereas Alternate and Kallang, which is much closer to the city center. There is some sort of something different going on in the economics there, and that probably attributes to its reputation, which sometimes is true, but sometimes can be quite misguided.
So what parts of it would you say is true? Which parts are maybe not so true?
I think a lot of people associate Geylang, which is the shophouses area, to the red light district and things, unpleasant happenings going on there. But I don't think this is very specific to Geylang. It's just because of the 80s, as you know. Maybe I'm right, I'm wrong. But this is from what I read, I know. Geylang kind of sprawled out in the 1800s where small little villages, clusters that moved and they formed there. The Kampong Glam used to be an area for the Malay community in the 1800s. When that acquisition of that land happened and they moved out, the sort of government gazetted Geylang area, Geylang Serai area, for the Malay community to stay. And from there was also a lot of satellite Chinese communities, especially clans and all. They set up outside of Chinatown area because that's where they could acquire land, and it was close proximity to Lavender area and also where the Kallang airport was at. Back then, prostitution really happened in the city center, where it's Chinatown, Keong Siak Street. Many people love it now. It sort of moved out when the gentrification of that area happened. It also happened in a lot of city centers, and it kind of moved out to Geylang because that was a place where you could get private property and own them and then engage in this kind of activities. Yeah.
Interesting. Actually, now Keong Siak is kind of cleaned up, right? So, would you say that Geylang, there's actually any opportunities that it could be cleaned up the same way that Keong Siak was?
So it's interesting because as an architect and also a designer, people misunderstand sometimes design professions as we are just looking at the design. But architecture encompasses more than that because you are designing or zoning places for humans, and a lot of times things are not, and as being human, you have to understand that it comes with the baggage of being a human, which is sometimes political, sometimes cultural, and a lot of societal norms with it. So first of all, people ask this question, I will always frame it, what kind of problem are we looking at here? Anything can be solved, right? It's depending on how much will you have. If you want to raise it to the ground, you can do it also, yeah? So for me, I think probably in the mind of the authorities, they have a desire to clean it up because of the proximity to the city center, the very well accessible infrastructure nodes, as well as this empty area beside Old Kallang Airport and Kampong Bugis, which are kind of designated as prime areas in the government's eye and big pieces of land for redevelopment and enhancement. So there is a lot of incentive for the government to sort of clean up this area for two reasons. The first one being in line with their overall master plan, I would think so. I may be wrong. Another one is also with redevelopment and higher property prices there gives more tax to the government. So they have the incentive. But their disincentive part for them is that right now they have all these brothels and their licenses that are given out based on legacy. And if we were to squash this activity, it will just move somewhere else that they are unable to control, or they have to re-establish protocols right now. So it really depends on what their priorities are right now and how big is the will for them to kind of look at cleaning up.
Right.
Yeah.
When we spoke with Curve, he was saying that actually a lot of the buildings in Geylang are also under conservation status. Would you say that that is one of the issues when it comes to wanting to clean up Geylang?
Yes, as you said, for a lot of these conservation houses and spaces, it's limited supply in Singapore. And from a design perspective, the very cool folks at URA would not want to see a shop house becoming like a massage parlor or something that is not befitting of the beautiful building. So of course they do envision those places to be like restaurants, offices, in fact even beautiful showrooms, and not just a place where they sell rice or incense or coffee shop and things like that. So they do want it, but I think as a planner or as a government level, if I were them, I would also have to think about a lot of other factors, not just from a planning or design perspective, but also on law and order, private property ownership, and also how much control can they bring in, and is it in the government's interest really to change?
Right. Okay, cool. Maybe we can circle back to maybe more of your personal experiences in Geylang. I mean, you mentioned that you moved to Geylang as an adult, right? Only in your late 20s. So how long did you stay in Geylang?
I moved into Geylang for 5 years now. I'm not a very neighbourhood person. I just speak basically my experience as a person walking along Geylang and trying not to disturb other people's day-to-day life.
Okay, cool.
Very agnostic way of...
Okay, so from a third person POV, like a fly on the wall point of view.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not the placemaker's favorite audience.
No, I think we need objective point of views. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, so I guess from your very agnostic point of view, what do you think of the area? Have you managed to explore the areas? And do you want to walk us through the different lorongs?
Well, I'm not the expert. I do know a few contractors who are really experts, and they always tell me this is the bloodline of Singapore. I would think that their wives would not be very happy to hear that. I would say that the different lorongs have different characters. Most of these characters are defined by either one of two things. First of all is the food places that are on the edges and the corner, which mostly draw in street life or traffic. Mostly within the lorongs are all zoned as residential, with the exception for the spicy area, which is now zoned as commercial office and I can't really think of the top of my head, is commercial activities, which are the brothels and prostitutions. Then the second thing that more or less drives the activities and the fun part of it, which I find very cultural, is the temples, clan associations, which incidentally, a fun fact that Geylang has the most amount of temples per square meter in the whole of Singapore.
Which is quite funny, right? It's like you got sin and salvation together at the same area.
Exactly, and a lot of these temples are in fact very active in terms of community, and I don't even know where do they find these people, but they do have very colorful costumes, parades through the street, a lot of music. It gets very happening, sometimes very randomly. And also I think during Vesak Day itself, the Geylang area is very, very lively and very, very exciting, because you get a lot of very nice events, a lot of volunteers coming there to serve food for free, carnivals, it's just a cultural spectacle. And I would say these are the few things that actually are what define the life of Geylang. And also the last one probably is the roadside food stores.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I guess what would a regular like Sunday or like regular weekend in Geylang look like then? Would it be like what you just described?
So for me, generally rule of thumb is Sunday is too chaotic. I try not to go out to the street too often.
So Sunday is usually a lot of people just hanging around.
Sunday is the absolute chaos of Geylang. That's where all the life comes in.
Maybe can you tell me what is like really good about living in Geylang from your perspective?
Okay, there are three things that are very good about Geylang. The first thing is access. It's very well connected to the whole parts of Singapore, because I live right near the Aljunied MRT station. So it is so interesting that sometimes like I don't even consider taking Grab or driving, because it's really faster by the train. And I think if we design our neighborhoods around a main transit system, it really helps to drive down the fact that Singapore can be able to become car-light rather than people obsessing over car ownership, simply because I think Singapore, the way we design is very sparsely settled in a way. But that also because, you know, the planners have a mind of having more air, unlike Hong Kong. The second thing is the food. There is food 24 hours and they are good, you know. One thing I like is when you work late at nights, which most Singaporeans do, is that when you reach home, there's no more food. You know, shopping malls close at 10, but the food court close at 8 or 9, you know. So it's an abundance. I think the last one is there's a lot of food stores that are really, really cheap. And I think this is the surprise of life you get. If you live in, let's say, a condo area that is walled out, or a HDB estate that doesn't pass through a HDB market, you miss out on all these little things that I find in terms of streetscapes are very interesting, because if you walk past a fruit store or a bread store every day, you would look at the offers that they have and then you think like, oh, maybe this is what I want. And then this is where also you build relationships and rapport with the people. So I don't like to interact with people, but I do know the fruit uncle because I go there way too much, you know. So I think this is how you build community spirits, by having these opportunities of chance to meet people on the street level rather than going to a mall where you start to hire people on a part-time basis. So there is literally no connection to the mall. Your connection to the mall is towards the mall owners rather than the store owners.
Right, so like more personal level interactions are available at spaces like Geylang lah, where there are more street side stores where the owners themselves are the ones running the stores.
It doesn't have to be the owners, but rather the people running the stores are always the regulars. And also I think just the journey from where you are at the train station or the bus stop walking back home, because you have this linear journey, you walk past a lot of stores, I think it forms part of your daily activity.
Right.
And it becomes very much like a neighborhood. Rather than, imagine you come out from a train station, you only walk past all these gates and all these fences.
Yeah.
And then the interaction is very siloed. Yeah, you don't really understand, you don't really have the feeling of neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the beauty of shop houses, and I think it kind of also helps that the characters that you see at Geylang, they are usually a little bit more friendly, more open folks lah.
So you mentioned about shop houses and like the beauty of that. I think one thing we don't mention enough is that Geylang itself is not a place where it is defined by its name. People always forget that Geylang actually has this low-rise density to it. And it's low-rise, but it has a very high density use. So in a way, it's a theory of two positions. At the start, when Singapore was developing, there were two schools of thoughts. The first school of thought was to build high-rises with very low footprint, but big plot of land to have a lot of parks. Another school of thought was to build really low-rise buildings, but be like Barcelona kind of concept and very closely together. Of course, today we know which school of thought that we went to and succeeded. So Geylang is the counter thesis of that school of thought, where the low-rise people think that it's more connected community-wise, it's more personable, and you get to understand your street better. I would argue that yes and no, because the way the new developments in Geylang are still quite gated. They are low-rise in volume, but they are not really the essence of a shop house. And it's very interesting because you get the shop house flanking the two sides, and to get home you have to walk past these shop houses. And I think that is the beauty of it, where you have these very personable streets to go in before your development. And I think that is something that maybe perhaps the planners and the designers are bringing back to Singapore, where you see One Holland Village, it's very popular and very lively now because they have these low-rise elements before you hit the high-rise.
Yeah, actually, when you mentioned One Holland Village, it's very interesting because I always go there actually.
Yeah,
and my partner also loves going there to do his work. And I think what's really nice about it is the fact that pets are allowed and they have a lot of free seating where people can really just sit there and just chill, just absorb the energy around. It'd be kind of nice if like Geylang had that as well.
Yeah. So the dichotomy, I feel that in this topic, in this area, it's always the balance between extreme consumerism and capitalistic ideals of maximizing land value versus the need to balance that community. And more or less, people will say it's a this or that. But you can feel that it's no longer that. It is always about community. Because if you build something for the community, it stays and it brings that capital value to your assets and things. So if you say that I'm going to remove all the seats in the shopping mall, which people do in the 90s and in the 2000s, in the 80s there are a lot of sittings in shopping malls. But in the 90s and 2000s, somehow we went this hyper-capitalistic movement and we removed that. And what happens is that people love the malls for aircon, but after a while it gets all boring. And that's why you see a lot of malls now bring in seatings. They bring in areas where people can rest. And that is very important to a low-rise development where people actually enjoy doing that. And by being there, you actually spend more money. So one thing I don't like about Geylang is that, yes, we have the right typologies, we have the right movement, but it doesn't have the right traffic and the right scale. As simply as because there are major arterial roads due to historical reasons, they are constantly expanded and they cut through the whole area that severely disrupts the very neighborhood quality of the space.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point actually. Do you have any other thoughts on, other downsides about Geylang right now?
I think the biggest downside is that it is a neighborhood that is very well planned in terms of density, but execution-wise really fell really flat. First of all, prioritizing car traffic in an area where sort of naturally built up by foot traffic. Geylang used to be a very foot traffic oriented area. Really breaks the ability for people to do the things that they like. That means right now it's just either you sit inside a cafe or you get knocked down by cars trying to find parking on the side. And for me, the idea of prioritizing car is really befuddling, especially when the national agenda is being car-like. If you think about it, having this whole lane of roadside parking, who does it actually benefit? And what's the actual intrinsic value of that parking lot versus the intrinsic value of giving back to the community, even if you talk about a dollars and cents point of view, is lower. Because if you convert that space to rentable area for the shop owners as outdoor alfresco seating, you can make more money rather than just 20 cents or 60 cents. Even if you charge $10 per hour for a parking lot, you're not going to make as much money as renting out that space for a tenant. So to me, that whole idea of prioritizing traffic flow and not having tailbacks and things like that is really an oversight. If we look at metrics like community engagement, we look at metrics like health, if we look at metrics like how well do you know your neighbors, and we plan the neighborhood from this angle, that is placemaking, but that also benefits the whole neighborhood in terms of economics. We would think very differently on how we do things. And for a low-rise environment, something that's not said a lot or often is noise pollution and air pollution. And these are a lot of externalities that are not measured and cannot be measured in the near term by any traffic engineer or any person looking at simulation data. So it is on the onus of people who plan low density estates to actually try and live in one low density estate with a 5 or 6 lane arterial road next to it, and they would definitely think about making it more pedestrian friendly, allow for people to rest, temples to have that extension of their space where they need to have events. Where you have an event, you benefit hundreds, if not 200, 300, or the whole neighborhood for a day. So the trade-off and I think the direction to do is very clear.
Right.
I think there needs to be a sort of major rethink about how we treat low-rise areas and not apply the same template of having this modern city planning thinking into low-rise areas. It's more romantic to park your car outside of the old town and walk to the beautiful restaurant in the old town, hold your hands with your partner, sneak in at first kiss, or talk about the innards of the event. And these are moments that people, when they design streets, they forget about that it's very important for a user. And these are the moments that we will remember, and not saying that I need to have a roadside parking next to the store I want to visit because it is convenient.
Yeah, makes sense.
I still feel that the beauty of low-rise areas is something that has to be looked at holistically. I do know that it's very difficult to get different agencies and different statutory boards to work together to find a solution, but there needs to be an overarching game plan to sort of have this radical direction and test it out whether or not it works. And by that time, it will have a place where it's very different charm from the rest. And also, I think perhaps they could even be a test bed for a lot of experiments of urban scale, because if you think about it, there's not a lot of places in Singapore left like that. And my criticism of the pedestrian walking doesn't just apply to Geylang, it applies to all the shop houses areas where there's still all this roadside parking around. It's a combination of impatient drivers versus people who are unaware of roads, and also versus there's not enough infrastructure to support that pedestrian movement. As a practicing architect, in terms of Singapore and Southeast Asia standards, Singapore probably is the best place of urban planning standards. And also in terms of design quality, it's really, really top. But there's always room for improvement. So my criticism is not saying that we are bad. We do have a lot of walkways and pathways, sheltered walkways. In fact, I think sometimes we are too pampered. Yeah.
Okay. I think the last question would be then, do you think that Geylang will change much then in the next 20, 30 years?
So it again goes back to the will of the policymakers. Well, from an economic perspective, once a certain gentrification reaches a threshold where, let's say you have people like Mayor who's doing a lot of good work, try to rejuvenate the areas by pushing out, I would say, negative externalities and bringing in things that actually associated with good externalities, it will probably hopefully trigger this kind of chain reaction where people find that there is more yield or value to bring these shops because the demand is better. And then slowly private enterprise will try and change it. But because the fact is that Geylang has not a lot of plots of land that belong to the government anymore. In 20, 30 years time, yes, there will be change, but I would say it will not be driven by government plans. Well, probably driven by things happening outside of Geylang, like Paya Lebar Air Base moving out, increasing the height, Kallang Airport developing, and Kampong Bugis developing, and then investors see that there's this spillover effect. All these investors come together and sort of push the government to say, hey, we need better roads here, we need better pavements here. And that is a holistic change. So I do think that it would change. But if there's no place for prostitution in Singapore to have a home, then it will still be there, because it's an externality that has to exist. In any big city around the world, there are such places, and there needs to be such places. We will be naive to think that it doesn't happen. So hopefully it would be one that is as nice as the Amsterdam red light district, where it is an attraction, it is a beautiful place to go, and you feel really, really nice and Instagrammable for everyone.
You still feel safe walking around that district.
Not just feel safe, you appreciate the historical culture things around that area, and also things are not cheap in that red light district anyway. So it also becomes a very big commercial hub for other sort of activities to flourish, not just the negative ones.
An attraction in itself, not just a red light district.
Exactly. And also the other things associated with it, you have really nice cafes, restaurant, offices, creative industries, and things like that. You know, KTVs, right? They don't only exist in Geylang, right? Like all the KTVs, they exist all across the island, but their contamination is managed. And as long as no one creates a big issue where it's like a stabbing or fighting, people live with it. People understand. And they also know the value of money that it brings around the area. So as long as it's managed and kept under control, I mean, you still shop at Orchard even though there's Orchard Towers there.
Actually, I didn't know that Orchard Towers was a thing, until like the case happened where someone died there.
Exactly. Exactly my point, you see. You don't avoid Orchard Road because of Orchard Towers. In fact, some people do visit Orchard Towers for the food. There are offices there that have normal functions there as well. And because these so-called negative things are contained, very well managed and kept out of sight and out of disturbance, so people don't bother with it.
Like you can coexist side by side because it's not really, it's like on the peripheral, you really don't really think of it at all.
Exactly. Yeah. So hopefully in the future of Geylang, it will be kept at that. And because Geylang is very big, it spans 3 MRT stations. The part where most residents are staying right now and the bulk of historical shophouses in this area, these are the ones that need to see that change. When more and more young people sort of move in and experience that area, I think slowly it will turn, and hopefully it will turn for the better.
Thanks, Quentin, for sharing your honest perspective with us. I felt it was a very interesting and refreshing take on what Geylang could be in the future, especially the parts you shared about the need for controlled contamination in Singapore, as with all other parts of the world. For those of you listening, if you have any thoughts and feedback on this episode, please feel free to leave a comment or drop us an email at hello@theafternaut.com. We'd love to hear your opinions.